friends, and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and my co host, Caleb, is not with me, only because I'm here to introduce the second half of Jared's interview. Hopefully, you have listened to the first half. If you have not, please go ahead and do so. It should be the most recent episode in your feed. We talked at length with Jared about many things, and in this half, we talk about a few interesting topics. He had a conversation with a friend of his, or more of a debate, where a youth leader put him in a position of debating the abortion argument. So I guess a trigger warning, if that is something that you might be sensitive to, just know that Jared tells a story about it that might seem a little insensitive. Maybe that's not the right word. It's really not, especially in the context that he tells it. So be aware that that's coming up. Also, too, we talk to him about hell houses. I've learned what those are. I did not know. Sounds like I should have known, but those come up. And then also, too, we have a pretty fun discussion regarding CCM music, of which Jared was fully immersed, just like Caleb and myself. So please enjoy this episode. We look forward to hearing more from you. If you do want to be a guest on our podcast, we absolutely welcome it. There's no right or wrong answers in our discussions. Whether you have completely committed to the faith or walked away completely, it does not matter to us. We are just interested about your journey. So if you'd like to be part of our show, please do reach out to us. We'd love to interview you. You can do so by emailing us at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. That's the best way to schedule these things, isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope that you enjoy.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
Going back to your youth experience before you left, what would your youth group self say to yourself now, and vice versa? Like, would you be upset with yourself or not? Like, I mean, how would that conversation go?
My youth group self would be very appalled. Um, that one, that I ever had a drink.
Mm-hmm.
That would have really upset me at that age. That I would have become a liberal. Um,
In quotes, yeah.
yes, would be. I think it would be shocking to my youth group self because it
Mm-hmm.
would have. Because I think I've heard others with a similar background, but being a liberal Christian was almost worse than being not a Christian because you were the fake kind. You were the one propagating the bad, like a false gospel.
You were the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes. So that's almost the worst thing you could turn out to be. Maybe a prosperity gospel preacher was up there. But one of those two things, right? Of like a liberal Christian, better off to have just walked away. So at least you're kind of like not persuading people incorrectly if you're just off the path altogether.
Yeah.
So I think it would be very confusing. My youth group self would be very confused and be like, "What happened? Like, how did we get here? Who
Sure.
got to you? Like, how'd you let your guard down?"
Sure.
Because I think that was a big part of kind of that culture was keeping your guard up,
Sure.
which I learned very well. I think that was a lot of it. I was very guarded against the war that was out there that I don't think was out there now.
Mm-hmm.
And in retrospect, I think it would be, I don't know if don't be so serious is the right way, or like relax just a little bit. You can be friends with, like, I was scared to be friends with public school kids. I mean, even the church there was
Hmm.
there was a big fear, again, going back to the fear of like, I don't remember it being explicitly taught in any way in this direct fashion of like, these are bad or good, other than some like, alcohol was bad or whatever. But somehow it was absorbed that like those who don't really set themselves up to be protective of their faith in Christianity are to not be fully trusted, be wary of. So
Hmm.
from where we stood at a public school kid, even if they went to church, if they were at public school, if they listened to secular music, if they dated, if they'd ever gone to a party, like you can't really trust those people. Can't be really friends with those. So I couldn't, I wasn't open to a full-on friendship with someone who wasn't completely inside of like the space we were in.
Hmm.
So I think going back, I would tell my youth group self, don't be like, let your guard down. The threat is not out there as big as like your faith will be okay and
Hmm.
you will be okay. You can be a little more open to people, to experiences, to doing things. And I'm not even talking about like, don't go get in trouble and party. I'm just talking about like being open to be fully involved with like the youth group, the kids in your neighborhood, things that I was just, I think, a little bit scared of, or a lot scared of. A little bit's probably understating, a lot scared of.
Very scared of, sure.
Yeah.
In some regard, like why not let God use you in those ways in those people's lives? Especially because if our theology is, oh, they're going to hell, well, why don't we go out there and try and figure out, how to communicate the message to them? And I
Hmm.
think, my wife and I talk about this quite a bit just because, she might be a little bit more conservative than me, but we still share the same idea that we really want our, at least for our kid who is in public school and kind of not purposefully, but we have the ability to put him in a good public school. We're not afraid of it. I would rather
Hmm.
have him be working his faith out in a public school setting or just in a non-Christian walled guarded setting so that when he does get to college, it's not like holy crap, or grad school, it's like he's not like holy crap, these people are normal, they're they're kind, they're good people. They may not believe the same thing as me, but they're not trying to, ruin my life. They're not the enemy, right?
Right.
Teaching them early on that people who are not Christians or people who engage in those behaviors are not the enemy, I think probably sets himself up for a little less surprise because I your story is very similar to mine and other people's that we've heard, which is once they whatever point they come out and they experience the real world, it's like, well, what I was told about these people is doesn't hold up. It kind of feels like that I was lied to about them.
Hmm.
And now I'm going to question everything else because this was such a big deal and it was completely false. So there's a little bit of difficulty or maybe a danger to put up those walls so early on and keep them going throughout youth for a lot of people. Some people love it, they stay in there and that's perfectly fine, but I'm like you where I kind of want to have those experiences with other people.
Hmm.
Well, thanks for that honest answer. I really appreciate you going through that with us because obviously I identified with it, and I think a lot of other people do too. Getting to the point that where you're at now, as an adult and in your mid 40s, like, do you look back on a specific youth group event, teaching, or just something that happened maybe on the regular that you were just like, ugh, that was cringy. We shouldn't have done that. That's not what we should have done.
So I think some of the things that I feel cringy about now, I felt cringy about then, which I also I think is tied into kind of maintaining my faith, is I can look back and some things that made me, I wasn't a great participator in some things, and I feel better about that now than maybe I did then. And some of it was like the forced evangelism
Mm.
of like really like intentionally, we're gonna go to this place, and then like the job is to go up to strangers and start talking to them, which I think a lot of it for me was like I was very shy. I didn't talk to strangers about anything. I for sure was not accosting somebody to like witness to them with a tract. So even when I went to that first Bible college, I had to take an evangelism class, and an assignment was like you had to witness to five strangers and write a report. And most people made them up and lied, ironically, in the Bible college, which I think also is a factor in how my faith went. Is like I refused to do that, so I just didn't do them and took the zero because I wasn't gonna lie. Like I had this moral line of like I can't
Sure.
lie, but I'm also not doing it. because I'm just not going to. So I think the forced evangelism and the skit teams, like kind of the skits, the choreography, the stuff that I think some people really loved about like being in a youth group. I didn't want to be a part of it then, and now I'm like, oh, some of those were so bad, the skits and the act.
Foresight, yeah.
Yes. And then I think the one big thing, of course, is the Hell House, like judgment houses.
Mm.
Because do you know what I'm talking about?
Judgment houses.
Scott clearly does
Oh,
not.
is
Oh,
this new for
we've got
you?
another new thing that hasn't come up on the show
Oh,
before.
and are you
Maybe I
familiar,
do.
Caleb?
I'm familiar, yes.
So I sometimes
I'm more holy
wonder,
than Scott, is what we've found.
that's what we learned
Well, yeah,
today.
clear.
So I do sometimes wonder of how much of what I experienced was just conservative evangelicalism and how much of it was also Southern regional conservative evangelicalism.
Mm,
So
hmm.
maybe this was more prevalent in the South. I'm just guessing. I
I
don't
think
know.
so. I think so.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's sometimes called a judgment house or a hell house. It always coincided with Halloween. So rather than a haunted house, because those are bad, just like dressing up in costumes and trick-or-treating, which we did not do, but I was David and Moses on different occasions for a harvest festival.
None of that shocked me, by the
No.
way.
But the Judgment House would be it was usually set up, sometimes they were elaborate productions where they had a whole building and you went there like out in the country and they charged admission, the big churches. And I've been to those, but also in our own church where it would be like the classrooms in the church. And it would be a story where you'd progress through the story through different rooms. And the
Okay.
beginning of the story was always high school kids at a party.
Of course.
Some good Christian kid is coerced into drinking who has never drunk before. Then you move from the party scene where someone drinks against their will or doesn't want to be a part of it, knows better but doesn't speak up, doesn't say anything, and they participate. You get to another scene. There's a car, and if your really church was committed, they brought in part or all of a real car indoors. And there's a driving scene. This car turns into a car wreck. Sometimes you get stalled on the tracks. Maybe you hit
Of
somebody
course.
else. There's drunk driving involved.
For sure.
And so that's very traumatic. And then there's speakers. I mean, it's narrate. They act it out. And it's teenage. It's the youth group, acting out the scenes. And then there's speakers and like a real dramatic crash sound. There's screaming, and then they die. And you move from there. Sometimes you might throw a hospital scene in where they die, and you get the full thing.
Depending on the level of production, sure.
Then there's a heaven. Sometimes, usually a heaven. That's a white room. There's a lot of smoke. And then there's a well done, good and faithful servant. So the Christian, but then they have to
Of course.
account for not witnessing to their lost friends because there's judgment involved.
A little bit of guilt there, sure.
Yep. And then there's hell. And so then you walk into a room that's dark. There's always a bunch of space heaters, so it's 100 degrees. There's more smoke machines. There's a devil figure. And then the kids who were the drinking, partying kids are in hell. There's also more, they're like morbid music or scout. There's usually like some piped in screaming, suffering in the
Sure.
background because it's hell.
Sure.
And some version of that scene is usually how it goes. And of course, by the time you get out of hell, and then there's like, maybe it's hell first and then heaven, where they're like, why didn't you tell your friends? And then they're very traumatized, the good Christian kid who didn't witness to them and let it happen.
Sure.
And then you exit into the invitation where the youth minister asks everybody to bow their head. And if you died tonight, do you know where you'd go? And if you want to avoid essentially the fate, raise your hand. There's going to be an opportunity to walk forward. And then souls are saved, of course, because they're terrified about being in the car crash in the hell.
All
So it's a
right.
journey of fear.
Yeah, I
And
was gonna
you bring
just
all the kids or at least
Oh
the
my
youth group,
gosh.
not the children. I
I,
don't think.
as you were describing, I'm like, I think I've heard of this before, and I kind of definitely understand where you're going with it, but like still to walk through every scene, especially to throw in there like you didn't change their heart.
Hmm.
Like that's a very guilt trip thing too. But talk about scaring the hell out of people. Like that's just a ridiculous kind of. You know what I think about too, Jared, is like no wonder some people felt like they needed to make that commitment or be baptized over and over.
Yeah.
Because when you make a commitment out of fear, you're always going to operate out of fear. you know? And if the number one thing is saving souls, I'm not saying that's necessarily the wrong thing, but to go about saving souls in that way is, in my opinion, one of the most shallow ways to do it because you don't know what that person needs. You're not trying to get them connected somewhere. You're just like, hey, if you actually died tonight, we want to make sure that you don't go to hell. Great, good
Yeah.
intention, but also, is it actually making a difference in their life?
It's just psychologically manipulating children,
For sure.
and when I think to again back to current day, I think that's a big difference as I see my faith now as a lifelong commitment to
Mm,
following the teachings of Jesus with particular emphasis on when I feel like it's important that when Jesus was asked the what's the most important commandment, he did not answer in a parable or answer with a question. That time he answered with a direct and clear answer, and it seems pretty easy to understand. The love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbors yourself. And
yep.
he didn't say first and second. He said this and that.
Yeah.
So like I see that as one commandment, and it's like that's I think the biggest shift of from fear of like following the teachings of Jesus, being a Christian, being saved, and being all those things is, and I view the a lot of what I was taught about, take up your cross daily, and there's going to be a sacrifice, and you're going to have to potentially leave your mother and father behind, and kind of the sacrifice I now view as like, well, we were taught that was like, don't drink, don't chew, don't go with girls who do. And that was like the Southern phrase. And now I see that as like, no, what Jesus was actually commanding is really challenging to love yourself, love your neighbor, and then love your enemy and see them as your neighbor. That's quite the sacrifice. You may have to leave your father and mother behind on that one because it's
Mhm.
hard. People don't always agree with you. Like that, it's such a radical notion of service and a commitment to trust and belief in God that I think it is this way of taking up your cross daily. It's just not so much a moral piety,
Sure.
which I think was the litmus test, even though it is that contrasting theology of like what you do doesn't matter because it's grace, but what you do is all we're going to
Talk
discuss
about
from here on out as a kind
seriously.
of a measurement of like, did it stick?
Seriously.
And even for my children, it's like letting them come to a conclusion. And this is a commitment to directing your life in such a way centered around these. And then for me, the Bible became a much more interesting book when it wasn't, didn't have to be inerrant, infallible, and instructions for life in the particular. When it
Hmm.
was like, oh, this is an ancient text of how people have tried to share how they've encountered God over all these years and who he is.
Hmm.
That makes all this way more interesting.
Way more
And
interesting.
reading is not a chore anymore because I was always trying to solve the puzzle. And now it's like, oh, if I don't get it, I can read it again and
Yep.
come back next week or let it go and come back another. I don't have to get it.
Interesting. Wow, great answer. Thank you for all of that. I want to ask a couple of more
Hold on,
things
Scott.
here.
Hold on. I got to jump in. Judgmenthouse.org.
Oh
You can
gosh.
find where they're located throughout the
Yes.
United States and Brazil and Puerto Rico. Minnesota has one. North
California.
Carolina has six. Texas only has one. Kind of dropping the ball,
What?
Texas. You're a pretty big
Yeah.
state. You should have more
Yeah.
than one. Sorry, I know we're on a time crunch. I felt like that was
Nope,
important to
that's
know.
very important. Thank you. Where is it the one in
Wow.
Minnesota? Should we go?
Brooklyn Park. I don't think we
Do
should.
it.
I think we
Don't
should.
take your kids, but you should
I
go.
think we should do a live podcast event
We
going
should do it
through
and then
that.
sit down and oh my gosh.
We're doing it.
Investigative journalism with
We're
a
we're doing it,
lapel
dude.
camera.
We're doing it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yikes.
I don't know how up to date this is, but there you go.
Amazing.
September
Well, it is a
13th through the
.org.
15th and the 20th and the 22nd here in
Amazing.
Minnesota.
Josh, we talked a little bit about music earlier. How do you relate to that music, the 5 iron, the supertones, the ska stuff, or obviously non-ska stuff? How do you relate to it now, particularly when it comes to the CCM music you listened to back then?
For me, I have no issue with listening to any of it. So some of it I listen to now because it still matters to me and I really appreciate it.
Hmm.
Some of it I listen to, maybe the lyrics don't resonate in the way they used to, but I still enjoy the music. I enjoy the connection I had at the time. So I'm not one of those that like ever put it down. I was like, I don't want to revisit that because I don't agree.
Hmm.
I love to continue to experience the things that I loved, even if they're not presently there. But some of them are like 5 Iron Friends. I think not an uncommon story, like relationship for 5 Iron fans is they've I think persisted because they raised questions differently, and their lyrics were focused on different things that seem as relevant, if not more now. They were a part of some of the questions I had that for me, it wasn't so much that they raised the question as I had the question and they sing about it. And I was like, oh, there's somebody out there who has also been concerned about this. And I like the music too. So I think like Five Iron is still very relevant, current. I listen to it not just out of like nostalgia or to share it with my kids. Like this is what I used to listen to, but it's still good right now. Some of it is like it can be fun from time to time. It's I don't have a steady diet of a lot of definitely like the more of the CCM stuff that was on the more popular radio. I can listen to Stephen Curtis Chapman and enjoy it for what it is, and The Great Adventure is still fun, but I'm not going to listen to that on a regular basis. It would be an every now and then thing. I kind of veered into the tooth and nail world as soon as I discovered it. So that stuff is easier to go back to because I think it offered something different at the time, which still, there's a through line for me, like musically, for where that took me. So, like the Christian ska thing, I heard the Supertones in Florida on the Christian radio station did the whole Saturday night like
Interesting.
hour long or 2 hour long alternative music show that was like 9 to 11 or something.
Hmm.
And I heard Adonai and was like, what is that song? Like I didn't even
Yeah.
know who they were. I didn't know what the song was. I heard Adonai and sat there and like waited hoping they would say the names of all the artists, which they sometimes did on the radio, but not always back then,
Yep. Yep.
and they told me who it was, and that's how I discovered the Supertones. I bought the self-titled off of that, and then the from that point on, like Strike Back, had to have that as soon. I became aware that it was coming out through probably HM or Seven Ball. I bought the magazines and like
Sure.
would go to the
Hmm.
Christian bookstore. So then I became aware, and so that was an immediate. I remember from that show, Adonai, and then MXPX, and I think it was either Chick Magnet or Wanad
Nice.
was was the first one I heard of theirs, and that was another automatic. This is great. I love it. What is that?
Yep.
I'm allowed to listen. I can play that CD in front of my parents and like also really like it. And then Five Iron, I heard there was I think it was like ZTV was a Christian music video show
Hmm.
that was
Whoa.
on like a religious channel, like a TBN's. I don't know if it was TBN, but some sort of channel like that that was religious programming that I want to say it was either a Friday night or a Saturday thing again, where for an hour or two they would play music videos of like alternative Christian music, which would have been, I think, Tooth and Nail, 5 Minute Walk stuff.
Hmm.
And I saw the video for a flowery song and it was the same thing. What is that? I
Yeah.
love it. I gotta have it. And so I was locked into the like Supertones and Five Iron from album one with both of them as soon as I heard like the first song for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a big shift for me of off the just the Christian radio station to a little bit more off the beaten path with music that I really liked more than I mean, I had Audio Adrenaline, I had the Newsboys, I had all that stuff because it was I felt like the best of what Christian radio had to offer. But when I heard these options, I was like, oh, this is way better. I actually really like this, and not like this isn't just good enough for Christian music, but I really like it. So those, I think, bands still matter in that way of that shaped my musical taste because I didn't, I'd heard Green Day on the radio. I'd heard like that was about all I knew about punk, honestly, was like
Hmm.
Green Day on the radio. And not even the full album, just the radio singles with the clean edits or maybe an MTV video that I snuck at my grandparents because they had cable, uh, kind of thing. But so the guy in my youth group in Missouri, Brian, that was my friend that also likes ska. When we went to youth camp, I think it was the summer prior to our senior year, so this was 97. This youth camp had a contest where each youth group could submit a music video that they made themselves for a contest. And there was one night in like the big worship part that they would play all the music videos. And then the group, I don't know if there were judges or we voted as kids. I don't know how the voting happened, but then there was a winner picked. So we found out about this and we were like, we're making a video. And it was like me and Brian, we were committed. We talked to our youth minister. He's super supportive. He's like, yeah, you guys do whatever you want. So this was like, we just told the rest of the youth group, we're doing this. Here's your parts. We're writing it. It's our idea. We've got the whole thing. This is what
Yeah.
you're going to do. Like,
Yeah.
and our vision, I don't know if we executed it well. I wish this, if it's still out there, I don't know. It was a VHS tape, but our vision was we were going to use Silage's Blue Igloo Cooler. That song was going to be the song for the video, but we were going to intersperse scenes of fishing for men because that was the lyric. I don't know if you're familiar with that song, but
Bring
it
it back to
was
me.
fishing for fillet of soul. I want to
Hmm.
be where I want to be to make you fishers of men. So that was our theme. We were going to be fishers of men. So we had like a blue tarp, and then we cut out cardboard waves, and we had like our idea was to make it really low like quality looking on purpose. So we hung a tarp. We had two people holding like cardboard waves and going back and forth to make it look like the ocean, and
Hmm.
then had people making fish like faces with their hands, and we had fishing rods and we were catching them out of the tarp, right? And then we had a cooler. But interspersed with that, we were like, we're gonna steal the idea from a flowery song, and we're gonna start with the two of us walking down the street, and then we're just gonna get people to join from shot to shot. So the first shot's gonna be two of us, then it's gonna be four of us, then it's gonna be six of us, then it's gonna be 10 of us until we get as many people as we can get. So that was our video for the camp. We were stoked. We thought it was amazing. It played at the whole thing. We high-fived and it was just like crickets. I don't think anybody knew who Silage was. I think it was just like because most people were using CCM songs and like what you would
Mm.
expect at a youth camp, and we did not. And I don't think anybody appreciated our vision, our art, or our musical taste. But the two of us were like, "We did it, bro! Did you
Yeah,
see that? Like that
high
video was
five.
amazing. We killed it."
Our most recent like mini episode just came out, and first question or my answer to the question was, "Thank God YouTube wasn't around, because yeah, it would have been like that."
Yes.
So
Would you?
wow,
Would you?
amazing.
You want another story from that youth camp?
Sure.
So at this youth camp, it was there was some programming that were like seminars where you would learn something, of course, theological or scriptural, but you got to pick your seminars. And so my friend Brian and I, of course, picked together, and we picked the one on like Christian ethics because we like this will be interesting. We were
Sure.
nerdy, and so we go to the ethics thing, and there's some youth leader leading it, like organizing. And the idea they had was they were going to split us into two groups and then give us a topic, and then we were supposed to debate it, and then they were going to assign us pro and con. This is
Mm.
1997, conservative Baptist, so of course the topic is abortion, and it's pro-life versus pro-choice. Me and Brian get assigned pro-choice. And so, like, and it's supposed to be the exercise, right? Of like the whole, you learned how to defend it by taking the other side and then da, da, da. So that's what we're supposed to be getting out of this, which, like again, thinking back, we're teenagers. What is this? Like, what were they thinking? But we get assigned the pro-choice side, which of course we're staunchly against. We're like decidedly traditional plural life, but we prepare and the debate happens. And they start it, and Brian's our spokesperson, and we also had like our own sense of humor. We're like sarcastic and don't mind a little shock value. So the debate's happening, and the other person, this typical youth group girl, is like, well, but if you do an abortion and the baby doesn't die and you deliver it, what happens then? Brian deadpans, doesn't miss a beat, just goes, well, that's what the dumpster's for.
Oh my gosh.
The gasp in the
Oh,
room, the biggest gasp was the leader of this thing, and the whole room just collectively
oh,
and I lost it. I just died laughing. Just
oh,
I'm uproariously laughing, and Brian's like, "What?" And then of course the leader is furious.
well,
Why would you say that? And Brian's like, "Because abortion doctors don't care about life. That's why. Isn't this what they do?" So from his
uh,
standpoint, he's like, "You told me to play a part.
I
These
played
people are
it.
evil. That's what they would do. I'm just playing the part."
I
Oh
did
my
what you asked
gosh.
me to do.
And in retrospect, it's like, how can you get mad at him? He faithfully
Yes.
lived up to our teaching of what we believed about. He just had the courage to say that thing in a space that you're not supposed to say that thing. And shut down the session. We got kicked out, and I got kicked out for laughing. Brian got kicked out for saying it, and we were both so mad because like I knew what Brian thought. I
course.
knew what he was doing. I was like, this is
Right.
a you set it up. You where he's playing Doctor Evil. You wanted him to
We're
be
gonna
Doctor
say the
Evil.
most
He's
evil
Doctor
thing
Evil.
that we can think of.
Yeah. Holy
Exactly. Like you
cow.
Yeah.
can't go worse than that, and this is
Yeah.
the worst kind of person that exists. So, but, but the look, it was again, it was like one of those that, hey, everybody knows the rules, and you just stepped over it.
Yeah. 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 But
And
yeah. Oh,
I, uh,
yikes, dude.
yeah, it was the most shocking church youth group thing I've ever
I'll say,
experienced.
goodness. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
And
word to leaders out there, don't put kids into situations where they're mock
oh,
debating very serious issues. Probably not the best
correct.
idea.
yeah. Oh my
Yeah, maybe the
gosh.
concept was broken from the start, not the guy just trying to do his
Right.
part who also thought it was funny.
Oh man.
Well, Jared, I here's what we're gonna do. I gotta
Yeah,
run. Caleb's gonna finish this up, ask a couple more questions, and do what you guys want to do. I don't
sure.
want to leave, but I gotta go pick my kid up. Jared, thanks very much for doing this. It's great to meet you. I'm sure it's
Thanks,
not the
man. Yeah.
last time we'll chat.
No, we'll talk more. Yeah.
So, all right, man. Talk soon.
I should let you know I debated. I was like, is that gonna offend somebody? I was like,
It
should I
might.
say something in advance? But I was also like, but I want to get the full-on reaction of not setting it up.
I mean,
Because
I think it's part of it tells part of the story of what
when I want to be clear, I wasn't like I am not and
no.
was not like thinking that that was an appropriate as like this is a good thing. It just he fully embodied what we were supposed to believe to be true, and then it was too me. It was outside the bounds, and it was like you can't do this to children. We took you seriously.
Right.
We learned well what you taught us, and you told us they were evil. He
Yeah.
couldn't think of a more evil response.
Well, it's should you have laughed? Maybe not, but what were you, 15, 16? Like
16 or 17, something like
what
that.
I was 15 and every person in that room was 15 or 16 at one point and at some point probably laughed at something that in hindsight they thought, yeah, I can understand why somebody wasn't happy that I laughed at that. And if you haven't, then, maybe you're a liar. Like it's just one of those things. The other thing is about it is like, yeah, you set that up for let's have this intense like I like public speaking. Like
Hmm.
I find it very, very enjoyable, but not everybody does. So you've got this heightened emotion, heightened topic, this super sensitive thing, and then yeah, you're expecting kids to just be fully adult in a situation where it's like, no, this is like your adrenaline is flowing. Like it's just kind of one of these things where you set people up and then you kind of go, why did you act like a 15-year-old? Like because I'm
Right,
15. It's like
right.
that's the way it
And
goes.
and I think for both, the reason that guy and I got along is like I was very serious about my faith, but
Yeah,
wasn't quite as precious or sacred about some things that like I think a large amount of people who are regular participators in church or even less than are. I think because my dad was a pastor and went to school at a Bible college and seminary, and like my friends' dads were pastors. My wife and I have realized like the difference there of I've never had a concept of the pastors coming over or like
hmm,
we're going to be at the pastor's house because even as a young kid, my best friend also homeschooled. His dad was the pastor of our church, so like he was less the pastor than he was Steven's dad. He was Mister Steve. Like
right.
that's who he was first to me because I was a third grader when
Yeah,
I knew him. So yes, he was the pastor of the church, but like he's also the guy that gave us $1 to go to the 7-Eleven and play a video game and get a Slurpee. Like
sure.
that was the more like central. So I never had this
Yeah.
perspective of that around clergy or some church stuff. Like, my dad drew the line when we asked, like, can I go swimming in the baptistry? Like that just seems like he didn't. My dad's like, no, we can't do that. But like we were in the church after hours. Just a lot of that
Right.
stuff. It was like I didn't have hang-ups around some of the preciousness of like protecting. So I was always good for a joke at our own expense, even as a teenager.
Right.
And that my friend, that same guy Brian, same sense of humor, which was we weren't very popular at youth camp. I'll just say that. We thought we were cool. It was one of those situations,
Sure.
right? Like we thought we were cool people. And we had the best taste in music, but no one else agreed with us kind of
Yeah,
situation.
totally.
But yeah. But I had a partner in crime and ska, so that was good.
Well, so speaking of the ska thing, I know we touched on the music a little bit. I want to ask two more questions.
Hmm.
One is we start to ask this occasionally because it's kind of an interesting answer. Like, and you kind of touched on a little. Is there any like band that has like had like a theological impact on you? And I know you mentioned Five Iron, so you kind of got a little bit of that, but like still to this day, even into adulthood, is like kind of had this theological impact on your life experience.
So I have touched on it, but Five Iron I think does is worth mentioning again in this area because of what they talked about that I think shaped a lot of that's where I found myself going anyway.
Sure.
As far as some concern for different things that I think weren't concerns in the
Yeah.
cultures that I was a part of. They were concerned with the poor, injustice, the oppressed. American Indian, I had a fascination as a young kid. I read books and biographies about like American Indians and Native folks and indigenous people. And so when they sung about it, I was like, oh, this band is like talking about things I already liked or had an interest in.
Right.
And so some connection that no one like even now, like no one in America cares really in a significant way about this population that's very much present among us and very much oppressed, you
Yeah.
know. And so they talked about oppression and injustice, and I think that like rightness and wrongness, fairness mattered a lot to me from a very young age. I don't know if you've ever gotten into the Enneagram stuff, but
Hmm.
it hasn't come up. But I did a seminary degree actually that I finished last year.
Oh, okay.
Yes, a little bit different, but we had to explore it there, and I learned that I'm an eight, and like a
Hmm.
big part of that is right and wrong, justice,
Hmm.
fairness, which was present from being a young child for me about just like small things, but it also affects my theology and my faith.
Hmm.
So I think Five Iron represented a ton of that, like concern for the least of these and a focus on justice that mattered to me and still does. And then probably the biggest figure is Rich Mullins
Hmm.
for me, and it's not because it's my favorite musically.
Yeah.
As far as style wise or any of those things, I love his music, but it's not. If he wasn't Rich Mullins, I don't know that I would, if
Sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
I have said for a very long time, he is my favorite artist
Hmm.
of all time, and it's more to do with his how he lived and who he was as a person, which I think is expressed in his music. So
Yeah.
they work together, and because of Rich Mullins, so I also had a experience in undergrad where I had this issue of I couldn't get past the injustice of poverty. Like it really bothered me
Hmm.
to the point where like I struggled at a grocery store to buy stuff, or like Walmart to buy stuff for myself, and I had no money. Like a big spending spree was like $35 at Walmart
Sure.
back then. I'm like a 19-year-old kid in college, but I was really bothered by like having what I needed and other people not, and like how I spent my money. I started sponsoring a child through Compassion International when I was like 19 when I didn't really have any money, and like that was a big expense because like I just felt this overwhelming concern that I couldn't get rid of. So that Five Iron ties into that. But Rich Mullins, the reason I chose Compassion is because Rich Mullins was a big ambassador and spokesperson for Compassion, and I had listened to his music from like when I was 8, like early on, like Winds of
Hmm.
Heaven, Stuff of Earth was the first record I heard or a tape. So I was very familiar with his music. I remember where I was in Missouri when he died. I remember like learning that on the radio, and I was 17, just barely 17, 16, 17, maybe almost 17. I guess like that was like it shook me
Hmm.
there. But I had read his biography, An Arrow Pointing Towards Heaven,
Hmm.
which goes into a lot about his life, and then I like a rabbit hole of interviews and books. But he talked about Brennan Manning and the Ragamuffin Gospel.
Hmm.
So I bought the Ragamuffin Gospel because Rich Mullins said it was such a big deal. And so then I had to, like, in that book, was massive when I was maybe 20, of
Hmm.
like kind of shaping, because he focuses so heavily on grace and like the belovedness of who we are and that God views us that way, which I think was a big shift from the fear and the and especially at that point I was pretty far into kind of a reformed tradition that had a heavy emphasis on our worthlessness and the depravity of man. And so then I read the Ragamuffin Gospel, and it's a different explanation about God in some way and to us. I think that was a big thing
Hmm.
of like, and that's been a thread till now. And even like when I did do this degree recently, of a real focus on our default nature being our belovedness in God, and not our default is not our sin nature, is what I have come to believe,
Hmm.
especially with the idea that if in heaven we are who we were meant to be, then that version must be our default.
Hmm.
It makes more sense to say our deficient or that is our default than our deficiency is our default, because then that's suggesting that God made us that way and
Hmm.
has to fix us, versus we have a role in that, which is a different tangent. But I think Brennan Manning started that kind of snowball of that, and then Brennan Manning in the Ragamuffin Gospel references so many theologians and writers
Hmm.
that became well, now I got to read about this guy. And that's where I was like, I'd never heard of who Thomas Merton was, because he's Catholic and I grew up Southern Baptist. We didn't really acknowledge Catholic influence or theology, even, and he was a modern Catholic, like he was
Yeah.
alive when I was alive, kind of thing. But Rich Mullins referenced Thomas Merton, and then Brennan Manning referenced Thomas Merton. It's like, well, now I got to find out who the Thomas Merton is. So I read A Seven Story Mountain, and it's like, this is all different. And so a lot of that happened for me because of Rich Mullins, and he was so well read. And then I actually am in the middle of a book now. Rich Mullins had a thing. I think it's anymore. Somebody talks about it, that he had required reading if you were going to tour with him before you
Hmm.
could join his tour. Like he would offer you a tour, but then like these are the books you have to read. And it was Chesterton's Orthodoxy. It was A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving, and then I'm sorry, and then Spiritual Geography. I think I can't remember her name. It's really interesting. It's about rural the Dakotas and place.
Hmm.
So I'm reading that because I stumbled across this. And I was like, well, I'm going to read Rich Mullins' required reading list. I've read the Orthodoxy, but I learned about G.K. Chesterton because of Brennan Manning, because of Rich Mullins. And
Right.
so they reference a lot of people that I now find more compelling and reasonable
Hmm.
to me about what they have to say about who God is and what the scriptures are, than maybe what my influences were when I was younger.
Yeah.
And so if I was going to say a musician that really like Rich Mullins, I was captivated by his life and his whole choosing poverty and not having control over his salary and not knowing it, and not owning things, and his kid brothers of St. Frank of trying to like live out the Franciscan vows without cloistering away. And like I was just fascinated, which like I was intrigued by Shane Claiborne and kind of his intentional community and what he
Yeah.
has going on. And just like and I think being homeschooled, and like I was open to oddity of like
Sure.
choosing a different way of living. And so I just became captivated by the life choices that Rich Mullins made. And then I just went down the trail of people he referenced, which led me to the people they referenced. And those are probably bigger theological influences now than all the people the first 20 years of my life I was pretty familiar with and
Hmm.
heard often.
Nice. That's awesome. That's the most expansive answer we've got. We started to incorporate that
Really?
question a little, and like people are like, yeah, this and that, this and that, and like, you know, people have those references, but like the idea that like this is essentially like led to like required reading for you. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I guess I could say not the same way, but like I remember when the Supertones Strike Back came out, because they have a song on there called Perseverance of the Saints,
Yeah.
which I don't know how familiar you are with like Reformed theology or
I went to Bethlehem Baptist for 20 years, so
oh, okay. So there you go. So you know that that's the fifth point of the tulip, right?
yeah.
Like the
Yep.
fifth point of Calvinism. I like we attended before my dad became a pastor out there. We went to a home church of these two professors at the seminary who were very staunchly Reformed, but also were fascinated by Puritans and kind of their way of doing church. So it was very much a you can do nothing on the Sabbath except church and read the Bible and do the catechism, literally
Hmm.
do the catechism. And so that was kind of the world we were in. And then like Supertone Strike Back came back out, and I was like, Perseverance of the Saints. And then if I remember right, they would have like Bible verses in the liner notes for every song. And I think that one's heavily Romans.
Yeah.
And so I would not align with that now. But at the time, that was a very big deal of like, look at these guys. Like I remember like showing that to my parents. I'm like, because it was one of those like, what is that music? And I was like, oh, let me show you. Like this is more theologically sound than your Southern gospel quartets there. Watch out. I've got
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Perseverance of the Saints right here. And look at these Bible verses. So that one was a significant thing at the time,
Hmm. That's
that
awesome.
I remember for sure.
Awesome. Well, you've spent a ton of time with us here today. Well, mostly me, because Scott bailed. No, I'm kidding. But you've spent a ton of time with us here. So one of the questions we always like to ask at the end here is, how do you think that 90s youth group contributes to the person you are today?
I think it has a heavy influence on my relationship to the church
Hmm.
because church was so central then, that that connection, that importance, that seriousness, and kind of building life around church, which was how we did it then. There's a lot of that. I'm not a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night person at this point, but I think that consistent participation and being a member, not just a kind of an attender who
Hmm.
shows up and slips out the door when it's over, because that was not my experience. So we're involved with our church, and then it's, I think, because my faith still matters to me, and that was a big part of it. It has become important for our kids to me
Hmm.
to be there in regular, just be absorbing, be present. We're not pushing certain things in maybe a way that I feel like I was more impressed on, and we're at a cooperative Baptist fellowship church now, which kind of split off from the SBC. And then at the time they were the bad guys, I remember, but now like they were the liberal version.
Sure.
But there's a different approach, and even the youth pastor is like real supportive, and it was formative for me at that age, and it still matters. And I have fond memories. I don't have bitterness. I
Hmm.
have difference, but no bitterness, if that
Sure.
makes sense. I can get fired up about things, but I'm not overly bitter. And I don't look back on that with any sort of anger or I wish I hadn't. So it was an overall positive experience, and I like that influences why I still participate in our
Hmm.
church now and do it the way we do it, and why I want our kids there
Yeah.
as well. I want them to have a good experience with their faith too.
Yeah. That's great. I think you hear the horror stories of people who are hurt, and rightfully so,
Yeah.
and they're filled with bitterness. And it's been cool to hear from people who are not. Like, my opinion has changed and I have some angst about what happened, but I'm not bitter. And it's also cool to hear that people have been able to get past that, and like let some of that anger and bitterness go. And, not everybody's going to be able to do that. Some of the hurts go too deep. And I
Right.
totally get that. But it is kind of cool when people are able to kind of also move past that, and not move past it like they're letting it go, but heal enough to move forward in a connection to faith, some sort of faith engagement. I think that's pretty cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I think my parents' openness
Hmm.
is a big part of why I'm not angry,
Hmm.
even though we don't raise our children similarly to the way I was raised,
Yeah.
and for, principled reasons, not just like, oh, we're different people. It's like, no, I don't want some of those things specifically. We're open. They let me debate, argue. We still do, but it doesn't affect our relationship. It's we have difference of our opinions now, but it doesn't cause any issues at Christmas or Thanksgiving. Like
Hmm.
we're fine there. There's no judgment associated with it.
Yeah.
So I that's my speculation of why I could have changed, like have a dramatic shift from that period, and also have things like, I mean, probably the most outraged I can be is that evangelist who preached the tares among. If I met him today in person, I'd have something to say,
Hmm.
but not so much for me personally. Like it was serious business, and it caused a lot of, I mean, I think it did cause harm, but I see the total package as something that was good. Being
Yeah.
homeschooled, the Gothic curriculum, the courtship, like all the things that I look at as silly, wrong, maybe harmful now. It's okay. I feel like I came out on the other side okay and got to a place that was fine, and my kids learned experience in that. My relationship with my parents is good. It's an overwhelming positive viewpoint of childhood, teenage years,
Sure.
even though there's plenty of awkwardness, cringe, and moments that I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably natural to some degree. So I don't
Yeah.
see it as something to get really angry or bitter about. And like I have support now. I think too, our relationship's
Hmm.
good today. That probably matters a lot.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, let's not tempt internet fate any
Right.
longer. Yeah. Jared, on behalf of both Scott and myself, just want to say thanks so much for hanging out with this. This is what we're going for. We want to hear where people at and kind of how they got there. And pretty unique story. We got something
Okay.
else we had never heard before, and that's always fun. So yeah, thanks so much for spending a couple hours with us. Really, really appreciate it.
No, thank you, man. This was fun. I hope you find something like to cobble together that's worthwhile.
No, this is great. Awesome.
And yeah, and I'm sure we'll run into each other on the internet again
Yeah,
soon, if
I'm
not on
around.
Zoom. All right.
Awesome.
See you, man.
Cool, man. Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we do want to say thank you to Jared for taking the time to talk with us. It was great to hear about his experience and just about his journey. And we got something new, another new thing that we hadn't heard of before. So that was pretty exciting. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handles at SurvivedYG. We're not super active there, but you can definitely find us there. If you want to find our personal Twitter accounts, that's the way to do it too. The easiest way to get a hold of the show, and you might want to get a hold of the show because you want to join us. We want to hear your story. So if you want to join us, you can always send us an email at isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. Again, that is isurvivedyouthgroup@gmail.com. We'd love to connect. We'd love to hear your story. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or a review. If you enjoy the show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. I have had a couple different formats on the show, but it's just a chance to sit down with somebody and talk about a music or talk about an album that they love. And once again, that's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.